The door swung open, and a man in a simple jacket and worn-out jeans stepped inside the grand lobby of an upscale bank in Los Angeles. No cameras, no red carpet, no bodyguards, just a quiet figure blending into the busy Monday morning rush. His scruffy beard and unkempt hair made him look like just another ordinary customer. No one batted an eye. No heads turned. No whispers spread across the room. And that's exactly what Keanu Reeves wanted. For years, he had heard stories, both good and bad, about how banks treated their customers, especially those who didn't look like they had money. Today, he wanted to see it for himself. No celebrity privilege, no special treatment. Just a regular guy walking into his own bank. Keanu adjusted his baseball cap lower over his face, stepped up to the reception desk, and gave a polite nod. "Hey there, I need some help with my account." The woman behind the desk barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked in a monotone voice, tapping away on her keyboard. "No, but I just need some basic information," Keanu replied, keeping his voice calm. The receptionist let out a sigh, finally glancing at him. Her eyes flicked up and down his outfit. "You'll have to wait," she said, pointing at a seating area where few others were already waiting. Keanu nodded and took a seat, watching as sharply dressed businessmen were called forward almost immediately. He glanced at the massive company logo on the wall, his bank. The one he had been a loyal customer of for years. The one where he had millions stored away. Yet here he was, being treated like he didn't matter. Minutes passed. Then an hour. No one called his name. He finally approached another teller, hoping for better luck. "Hey, I just need to check something on my account," he said, handing over a basic ID. The teller barely looked at it. "Sorry, sir, but we can't assist you without a high-value client appointment." Keanu blinked. What?" She gave a forced smile. "We only provide priority services for premium account holders. You might want to try another branch." A strange feeling settled in his chest. He wasn't expecting special treatment, but this was something else. Was it his clothes? The way he spoke? Keanu Reeves, a man known for his humility and kindness, was being brushed off by his own bank. And he wasn't going to let this slide. Keanu took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't here to cause a scene, but something about the way they dismissed him didn't sit right. Was this how they treated every customer who didn't walk in wearing a designer suit? Still standing at the counter, he tried once more. "I understand, but I do have an account here. I just need to check some details. Can you at least look it up?" The teller barely suppressed an eye roll. "Sir, we're very busy. If you don't have an appointment or a premium account, there's nothing I can do." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "And how do you know I don't have a premium account?" The teller hesitated for a second before recovering. "I mean, you don't look like—" She stopped herself, but the message was clear. Keanu let out a small chuckle, more out of disbelief than amusement. He had heard of banks judging people based on their appearance, but experiencing it firsthand was something else. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. This wasn't about money. It was about respect. He stepped away from the counter, glancing around the massive lobby. Polished floors, chandeliers, and security guards stationed at the corners. Everything about this place screamed wealth. But beneath all the luxury, there was an undeniable coldness. People weren't seen as individuals here. They were judged based on their clothes, their posture, the way they carried themselves. Keanu sat down again, observing. A man in an expensive tailored suit strolled in, barely making it 3 steps before a banker rushed over with a welcoming smile. They shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and within seconds, the man was led to a private office. A woman in casual clothes, looking slightly anxious, approached a teller. She was given the same dismissive treatment Keanu had received. The pattern was clear. He leaned back in his chair, his mind drifting. He thought about all the times he had read stories of people being denied service, of hardworking individuals being treated like they didn't belong simply because they didn't fit a certain image. And here he was, watching it unfold right in front of him. But what would happen if they knew who he really was? That thought lingered. He could pull out his ID, mention his name, and everything would change in an instant. Apologies would pour in, managers would appear, and suddenly, He'd be treated like royalty. But that wasn't the point. He wasn't looking for special treatment. He wanted fairness. He wanted to know how this bank treated regular people. And right now, it wasn't looking good. Just then, he spotted a woman arguing with another teller. She looked frustrated, holding a small envelope in her hands. "Please," she said, her voice strained. "I just need to cash this check. It's my salary. I don't have time to go somewhere else." The teller barely looked up. "Ma'am, we have policies. If you don't have an account here, we can't cash it." "But my employer banks here," the woman protested. "They told me it would be fine." "I'm sorry, but you'll have to try another branch." Keanu could hear the exhaustion in her voice. She wasn't asking for a favor, she just needed what was rightfully hers. Before he could think twice, he stood up and walked over. "Excuse me," he said, looking at the teller. "Is there really no way you can help her?" The teller frowned. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." Keanu turned to the woman. "What's the issue?" She sighed, shaking her head. "It's just my paycheck. I've been working extra shifts, and I need to pay my rent today. I don't have an account here, but my company does. They always send our checks from this bank." Keanu nodded, then looked back at the teller. "So what's the problem?" The teller pursed her lips. "Like I said, she doesn't have an account. We don't cash third-party checks unless she was dressed in a suit and looked rich." Keanu interrupted, his voice still calm but firm. The teller's face turned red. "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." A few people nearby were starting to pay attention. The security guards exchanged glances, one of them shifting slightly as if preparing to step in. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "You know what's funny?" he said, unfolding it. "I actually do have an account here. And not just any account, a premium one." The teller blinked, looking at the paper. It was an official document with the bank's letterhead, confirming his status as a high-value client. Silence fell over the counter. Keanu watched as recognition slowly dawned on the teller's face. Her eyes widened slightly, and she swallowed hard. The receptionist from earlier noticed, too, sitting up straighter in her chair. You're... Keanu raised a hand, stopping her. "Let's not make this about me. Let's talk about her," he said, gesturing to the woman with the check. "If I weren't standing here, would you have helped her?" The teller opened her mouth, but no words came out. Keanu let the moment hang in the air before shaking his head. "That's what I thought." He turned to the woman and gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't worry. I'll make sure you get your check cashed." The woman looked at him, confused. "But how?" Keanu simply smiled. "Let's just say I know a thing or two about this bank." At that moment, a tall man in a suit hurried over. The branch manager. His face was pale, and he was clearly trying to assess the situation. He glanced at Keanu, then at the nervous teller, before forcing a polite smile. "Mr. Reeves, I had no idea you were here today. If there's anything we can do..." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Now you want to help?" The manager hesitated. "Of course, sir. We always value our clients." Keanu crossed his arms. "Even the ones who don't look rich?" The manager's face tightened. He knew there was no good answer to that. Keanu glanced around the room. The security guards were still watching. The customers were whispering. The same people who had ignored him when he walked in were now paying attention. But he wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about him. It never was. The silence in the bank lobby was almost deafening. The manager stood frozen, his forced smile faltering as Keanu's words hung in the air. The other employees shifted uncomfortably, stealing nervous glances at each other. It was clear that they had been caught, exposed in a way they never expected. The woman with the paycheck hesitated, looking between Keanu and the bank staff. She still wasn't sure what was happening, but she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Minutes ago, she had been invisible, just another struggling customer being brushed aside. Now, the same people who ignored her seemed unsure of what to do next. Keanu turned back to the manager. "So, are you going to cash her check now? Or does she still not meet your priority client standards?" His voice was steady, calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. The manager cleared his throat and nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Reeves. We'll be happy to assist her right away. He gestured for the teller to process the transaction, and the employee, now visibly nervous, fumbled with the keyboard as she took the check from the woman's hand. As the machine printed the receipt, Keanu could feel the tension in the room. The customers were still watching, some exchanging knowing glances. A few even nodded subtly, as if they had been in similar situations before. It made him wonder how many people had walked into this very bank and been turned away simply because they didn't look the part. The woman finally received her money, gripping the cash tightly in her hands. She turned to Keanu, her expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. I don't even know what to say. Thank you. Keanu gave her a small, reassuring smile. You don't have to say anything. You just needed what was yours. She looked down at the money, then back at him. But why did you do this? You don't even know me. Keanu shrugged. Because this isn't just about you. Or me. It's about how people are treated when no one's watching. The woman nodded slowly, her eyes filled with emotion. Then, with a final grateful glance, she tucked the money into her purse and walked out of the bank. Keanu turned back to the manager. So tell me, does this happen often? The manager's face was pale. He hesitated before shaking his head. No, of course not, sir. This was just a misunderstanding. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Misunderstandings? He gestured toward the waiting area, where other casually dressed customers were still sitting, ignored. Looks like a pattern to me. The manager opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by another voice. Excuse me. A man in his late 40s stepped forward. He was dressed in a slightly worn-out business casual outfit, holding a folder filled with papers. I've been trying to get a loan approved for weeks. I have all the documents, good credit, and enough collateral. But every time I come in, they tell me something different. Either my paperwork isn't complete, or they need more verification. But when my business partner, who happens to dress in suits and drives a luxury car, walks in, they approve his requests instantly. What's going on here? The manager visibly tensed. Sir, I assure you we follow strict policies. Keanu cut in, his voice steady but sharp. Strict for some people. Flexible for others. The man with the folder let out a frustrated sigh. That's exactly what it feels like. Another customer, a woman in a simple dress, spoke up. I came here last month to open an account, and they made me jump through hoops. A friend of mine, same age, same job, but wearing designer clothes, walked in a week later and got it done in minutes. They didn't even ask her for extra paperwork. Murmurs rippled through the room. Other customers started nodding, some whispering to each other, others looking directly at the bank staff with a newfound boldness. It was as if Keanu's presence had given them permission to voice their frustrations. Keanu turned back to the manager, his expression unreadable. Do you see the problem now? The manager's hands fidgeted slightly. He was struggling to maintain control of the situation, but it was slipping fast. Mr. Reeves, I understand your concerns. But I assure you, we do not discriminate. Keanu held up a hand, stopping him. It's not about what you claim to do. It's about what actually happens. He gestured around the room. These people aren't making it up. They've lived it. The manager swallowed hard. I will personally look into these concerns. And I can assure you, changes will be made. Keanu studied him for a moment, then simply nodded. I hope so. The tension still lingered in the air, but something had shifted. The power dynamics in the room had changed. The bank staff, once indifferent and dismissive, now looked uneasy. The customers, once hesitant and silent, now stood a little taller, their voices heard. Keanu glanced around one last time before heading toward the exit. As he reached the door, one of the security guards, who had been watching the whole time, gave him a small nod of respect. Keanu returned the nod, then stepped outside into the bright Los Angeles sun. The city buzzed around him, people moving, talking, living their lives. As he walked down the street, he couldn't help but think, how many other places were just like that bank? How many other people were judged before they even had a chance to speak? He didn't have all the answers. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a one-time thing. And he wasn't done yet. Keanu walked down the street, his mind still lingering on what had just happened inside the bank. The air outside felt different, lighter, as if stepping out had freed him from the weight of that cold, judgmental atmosphere. But the feeling in his chest remained, a mix of frustration and determination. He had seen it with his own eyes. The way people were treated based on appearances, the way the bank operated under a system that quietly pushed certain customers aside while rolling out the red carpet for others. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about respect. And it wasn't right. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw a message from his assistant. "Hey, did you visit the bank?" They called. It seemed nervous. Keanu exhaled slowly. Of course, they had figured it out by now. Someone must have checked his name after he left, realizing too late who they had just dismissed and ignored. He didn't reply. He already knew what would happen next. Within minutes, as if on cue, another message appeared, this time from an unknown number. "Mr. Reeves, we sincerely apologize for the experience you had at our branch today. We would love the opportunity to make things right. Please let us know if we can arrange a personal meeting at your convenience." Keanu stared at the message, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Now, they wanted to help. Now, they were eager to listen. But what about the people still sitting in that lobby? The ones who didn't have a recognizable name? His fingers hovered over the screen before he locked the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He wasn't interested in their damage control. Instead of heading home, he found himself walking aimlessly through the city, his mind racing. He passed by street vendors, small businesses, and everyday people going about their routines. People who, just like the woman at the bank, worked hard for every dollar. People who, just like the man with the loan application, weren't asking for favors, just fairness. Then, as he turned a corner, something caught his eye. A small community bank. Not the towering corporate kind, but the type of place with a simple sign and a modest entrance. He paused for a moment, then stepped inside. The atmosphere was entirely different. No polished marble floors, no cold silence. Just a few tellers helping customers, a manager speaking to a young couple, and a genuine warmth in the air. Keanu watched as an elderly man approached the counter, his hands shaking slightly as he passed a few bills to the teller. The employee smiled warmly, speaking to him with patience and kindness. No judgment. No dismissiveness. Just simple human decency. Keanu felt something shift inside him. This was what banking should be. As he stood there, taking in the contrast between this small bank and the corporate one he had just left, an idea began to form in his mind. A way to do something bigger than just exposing one bad experience. A way to create real change. But before he could think it through, he heard a voice behind him. "Hey, wait a second, you're Keanu Reeves." Keanu turned to see a young man staring at him, eyes wide with surprise. The recognition spread quickly. A few other customers glanced over, whispers starting to ripple through the room. Normally, he would have smiled, maybe taken a quick photo, and gone on his way. But this time, he saw something else in their expressions. Something deeper than excitement. Curiosity. As if they had just witnessed something rare, a celebrity, not in a fancy office or private suite, but standing in a small neighborhood bank, observing, thinking. The young man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sorry, I didn't expect to see you here. Do you bank here?" Keanu hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Not yet." The young man frowned slightly. "Oh, is there a reason?" Keanu looked around the room again, then back at the young man. His next words came naturally, as if they had been forming in his mind long before he even realized it. "I'm looking for something better." The young man tilted his head. "Better how?" Keanu gave a small smile. "Better for people like you. Like her." He nodded toward the teller speaking patiently with an elderly customer. Like the guy who just needed his loan approved. The young man's eyes lit up with understanding. "You mean a bank that actually cares about people?" Keanu nodded. "Something like that." The young man stared at him for a long moment before grinning. "Well, if you ever start one, I'd be the first to open an account." Keanu chuckled, but inside, The idea was no longer just a passing thought. It was real. Possible. As he left the bank, stepping back onto the busy street, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of purpose. But he wasn't done yet, because the real change was just about to begin. Keanu walked with purpose now, his mind racing with the possibilities. The conversation with a young man had planted a seed, but as he moved through the crowded streets, an idea was taking root, growing into something bigger than just a response to what had happened at the bank. This wasn't just about exposing a broken system. It was about changing it. But before he could even begin to explore the next step, his phone buzzed again. Another message. Mr. Reeves, please, we would like to resolve this matter. Our executive team is ready to meet at your convenience. He stared at the text, shaking his head. The bank still believed this was just a PR issue, something that could be smoothed over with the right words and a polite apology. They still didn't get it. As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, something caught his eye. A sleek black SUV parked across the street. Normally, he wouldn't have paid much attention, but there was something off. It had been there when he entered the small community bank. And now, as he started walking, it slowly pulled forward, following at a distance. A bad feeling crept into his gut. He had dealt with his share of attention over the years, fans, reporters, even the occasional overzealous paparazzi. But this was different. This wasn't excitement or curiosity. It was something else. Keanu ducked into a narrow alley, stepping behind a row of stacked crates. He waited, watching carefully. Seconds later, the SUV rolled past the alley entrance, pausing briefly before continuing down the street. He exhaled slowly. Whoever they weren't just casually driving by. They were watching him. His thoughts immediately went back to the bank. Was it them? Someone higher up, worried about what he might say? What he might do? Or was it something bigger, someone else who had been paying attention to his movements long before today? Whatever it was, it meant only one thing. He was on the right path. Determined now, he took a different route back, zigzagging through side streets and slipping into a crowded cafe. He ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, watching carefully for any signs of the SUV. Nothing. But the unease remained. He pulled out his phone, this time making a call. The line rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. Keanu? Didn't expect to hear from you today. Hey man, Keanu said, keeping his voice low. I need a favor. There was a pause on the other end. You sound serious. What's going on? Keanu glanced out the window again before answering. I think someone's following me. The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. Where are you? Keanu gave him the location, and within minutes, a black motorcycle pulled up outside the cafe. A man in his late 40s, wearing a leather jacket and dark sunglasses, stepped inside and made his way to Keanu's table. You weren't joking, the man said, sliding into the seat across from him. Tell me everything. Keanu quickly explained the events at the bank, the messages, and the SUV that had been tailing him. His friend listened intently, nodding as he processed the information. This isn't just about bad customer service, the man finally said. If they're watching you, it means you've stirred up something much bigger. Keanu leaned in. That's what I'm trying to figure out. What could be so important that they'd go this far? The man exhaled, drumming his fingers against the table. Banks, especially the big ones, aren't just about money. They're about control. Power. If someone like you calls them out publicly, it's not just a bad look. It's a threat. Keanu's jaw tightened. He had wanted to believe this was just a case of elitism, a business that had lost sight of its customers. But now he wasn't so sure. His friend leaned closer. If they're already watching you, they're probably digging into everything. Your connections, your moves, maybe even your finances. Keanu sat back, processing the weight of those words. He had always been careful about his privacy, about staying grounded despite his fame. But now that privacy was being invaded. And for what? His friend checked his watch. I can make a few calls. See if anyone's picked up chatter about you lately. But whatever you're planning, be careful. This isn't just some internet outrage story. This is real. Keanu nodded, the reality sinking in. He wasn't just exposing a broken system anymore. He was walking straight into something much bigger than he had anticipated. And now, there was no turning back. Keanu sat in the dimly lit backroom of a small restaurant, his friend across from him scrolling through his phone with a tense expression. The weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on him, but he stayed calm, his mind piecing things together. Finally, his friend looked up. "I made some calls. Someone high up is definitely paying attention to you. But here's the twist. This isn't just about your bank account or bad service. You hit a nerve. A big one." Keanu leaned forward. "How big?" His friend hesitated before answering. "The bank you walked into today? It's connected to a larger network, one that has a history of quietly pushing people out, rejecting loans, and favoring only the wealthiest clients. There have been whispers about them for years, but nothing concrete. No one's been able to prove anything." Keanu frowned. "And now they're worried I might?" His friend nodded. "You weren't supposed to see what you saw today. And they weren't supposed to mess up by treating you like just another customer. But now that you've noticed, they're scrambling. They don't know what you're planning, but they're watching to see if you make a move." Keanu sat back, exhaling slowly. He hadn't expected this. He had thought this was just about poor customer service, about a bank failing to treat people with dignity. But this was bigger, systemic. A quiet, hidden way of keeping certain people from getting ahead while protecting the wealthiest at all costs. His phone buzzed again. Another message. "Mr. Reeves, we need to speak with you immediately. There has been a misunderstanding and we believe we can clarify everything. Please contact us as soon as possible." Keanu stared at the screen. A misunderstanding? Now, they wanted to talk. But not because they cared, because they were afraid. His friend watched him closely. "So, what's your moves?" Keanu thought for a long moment. He could expose them. He had the resources, the connections. A single interview, a single post, and the whole world would know what was happening behind those polished glass doors. But would it change anything? Would it stop them from doing it again, just in a quieter way? Then an idea hit him. He smiled slightly, locking his phone and slipping it into his pocket. "I'm going to do something better." His friend raised an eyebrow. "Better how?" Keanu stood up, his mind already working through the details. "They operate this way because they think they're the only option. That people have no choice but to play by their rules. But what if they weren't the only option?" His friend's eyes widened in realization. "You're not just exposing them. You're replacing them." Keanu nodded. "A bank that actually serves people. No hidden barriers. No judgment. Just fairness." His friend let out a low whistle. "That's bold." Keanu smiled. "So let's make it happen." The next few days were a whirlwind. Calls were made. Meetings were held. People who had been silently frustrated for years started stepping forward, sharing their own experiences, their own stories of rejection and unfair treatment. And then, the final twist. One of the bank's own employees, someone who had witnessed the system from the inside, came forward with proof. Documents, emails, policies that showed exactly how the bank operated, how they quietly decided who was worth helping and who wasn't. Keanu didn't need to expose them. They did it themselves. The media erupted. The bank executives scrambled to control the damage, issuing statements and apologies. But it was too late. The world had seen the truth. And in the middle of it all, Keanu stood firm, not just as an actor, but as someone who had dared to ask a simple question. What if there was a better way? As the dust settled, the bank's reputation crumbled. But Keanu's plan? That was just getting started. The fallout was immediate. News outlets picked up the story, and social media exploded with outrage. People shared their own experiences, stories of being denied loans, treated unfairly or overlooked simply because they didn't fit the bank's unspoken standards. The bank executives tried to spin the narrative, claiming they were reviewing policies and committed to change, but no one believed them. The damage was done. But for Keanu, this wasn't about destroying a company. It was about building something better. He stayed quiet as the media storm raged on, focusing instead on what came next. He met with financial experts, community leaders, and everyday people who had been affected by the system. The idea of creating a bank that truly served people, one that was fair, transparent and accessible, was no longer just a thought. It was becoming real. Investors reached out, some drawn by the potential, others simply wanting to be part of something meaningful. Keanu made one thing clear: this wasn't about making the rich richer. It was about giving people a chance. A real chance. And then, something unexpected happened. One of the tellers from the original bank, the woman who had hesitated before following the rules, the one who had looked like she wanted to help but couldn't, reached out.
She wanted to talk.
Keanu met her at a small cafe, away from cameras and attention. She looked nervous, but determined. "I saw what happened after you left," she said, stirring her coffee. "They didn't even care about what they did. They only cared that someone important saw it." Keanu nodded. "That's what I figured." She looked up at him. "I've been working there for years. I've seen so many people walk in, hoping for a chance, only to be turned away. Some of them had good credit, steady jobs, everything you'd think would matter. But if they didn't look like the bank's ideal client, it didn't matter." Keanu listened, letting her speak. He already knew this was bigger than just his experience, but hearing it from someone on the inside made it even clearer. She took a deep breath. "I don't want to be part of that anymore." Keanu leaned forward. "Then don't be." She hesitated, then smiled. "I heard you're starting something new. If you're really doing this, I want in." Keanu smiled back. "Then welcome aboard." The pieces were coming together faster than he had expected. More former employees from the bank started reaching out, people who had been frustrated with the system, but never had a way out. Now they did. And then one day it was official. The announcement was made, and the world took notice. A new kind of bank, built from the ground up, with fairness and accessibility at its core. No hidden fees. No secret rules. Just real opportunities. Some people doubted it would work. Others said it was just a publicity stunt. But Keanu didn't care about the skeptics. He cared about the people who walked into those doors, knowing they would be treated with respect, no matter their background. Months passed, and the world moved on from the scandal of the old bank. But something had shifted. Other financial institutions took notice, quietly adjusting their own policies. People started demanding better treatment, knowing now that they had options. And Keanu? He didn't seek credit. He never gave a big speech or tried to make himself the face of the movement. He simply let the work speak for itself. One evening, as he walked into one of the new bank's branches, he saw a familiar face, the young man from the small community bank, the one who had told him he'd be the first to open an account. The young man grinned. "Told you I'd be here." Keanu chuckled. "And how's it been?" The young man nodded, looking around. "It's different. Feels real. Like we actually matter here." Keanu smiled. That was all he had wanted. As he stepped back outside, he took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air. He had walked into his own bank once and been ignored. Now he walked into a place that stood for everything that moment had lacked. It wasn't just about money. It never had been.
It was about respect.
About dignity.
About people.
And that, more than anything, was what truly mattered.